Warning: this video contains ramblings from an idiot with far too many opinions about everything. So you finally done did it. You got yourself into Dungeons & Dragons and rounded up a bunch of your friends to play with, and you're starting a campaign. Now, how do you go about creating your character? In this video, I'll be talking about what I feel to be the 3 most dangerous pitfalls during the character creation process in Dungeons & Dragons. I generally refer to these as pitfalls because once a player believes that this is the only or the best way to create a character, it's very easily ingrained into their process and it's harder to break them out of it. This video is primarily targeted towards newcomers to Dungeons & Dragons, but I feel that the things I'll be sharing are general enough to be able to fit any RPG that you're looking to play. Keep in mind that the content of this video is highly subjective, and your own experience will most probably vary, since the only real way to figure out what works best for you is to actually play more games, experience longer hours, and consume more information about the subject at hand. With that said, let's start with the first pitfall. The first pitfall I'll be discussing is failing to fit the tone of the campaign. For both DMs and players, proper expectation setting is imperative before starting a game. Tone is an important tool in conceptualizing characters, as the number of options when thinking of a character is initially determined by what the tone of the campaign would look like. For example, a roguish silver-tongued buccaneer will fit very well in a campaign whose tone is established to be a nautical exploration and intrigue campaign that features a lot of the high seas and frontier villages in recently discovered islands. But the same character might look a bit out of place in a gothic Victorian horror campaign, primarily set in urban cities. There is of course nothing stopping you from playing a pirate in a landlocked city where the nearest body of water big enough for a ship is 2 weeks away. However, certain events and storylines are easier on the DM to involve your character in if they already mesh well enough with the tone that they have in mind for the campaign. And how do you find out if your concept is compatible with the DM's intended tone? You communicate. Normally, GM should always make it clear from the very beginning before the other players are even selected about the tone of their campaign. This way, you can be sure that everyone is on board with what you have in mind for the game, and your job is made easier by having naturally fitting characters. A good way to establish and make your campaign's atmosphere clear is by providing visual aids to the players in a pseudo-vision board of your game. It's as simple as making a collage with representations of the emotions and imagery that you want to evoke when you're playing the game. Is it a dark forest with seeming eyes watching you from beyond the dark? Is it high-intensity battles and chaotic warfare miles off the ground in huge flying machines? Or is it claustrophobia-inducing cramped spaces with unknown creatures or traps lurking around every corner? Whatever it is, make sure that your players have a clear sense of what your vision is for the game, and if they're good with it, they'll be able to make characters for your setting pretty easily. For the players, it would be greatly appreciated if you're also equipped with a mental library of ideas that you can draw out character concepts from while you're playing a game. If you join a game that is established to have a wuxia feeling, consume media that is related to wuxia. Take some common tropes, make notes of how the aesthetics of the genre look like, so that you can better visualize the setting and use the information that you have to provide input and opportunities to collaborate with the GM about fleshing out their setting deeper. Lastly, your GM will most likely ask for your character's long-term goal. A long-term goal is simply a desired condition by your character that is, for some reason or another, impossible or very difficult to accomplish at their current situation, which is right now what your status is in-game. Just like how certain themes and stories are featured heavily in some genres but not others, so too is your character's long-term goal. Much in the same vein of the first point regarding having naturally fitting characters, it's also recommended for inexperienced players to have a goal that is narratively simple and thematically aligned to the tone of the campaign. Generic fantasy settings are very welcome to standard heroes' journey goals like becoming strong enough to protect everyone or simply amassing power to fight evil, and intrigue and political campaigns might favor selfish and twisted goals like seizing the throne for yourself, making a high-ranking noble your puppeted figurehead, and dark horror campaigns might be a good place to launch stories of sacrifice and Faustian bargains, like escaping the clutches of a dark deal you made, or making a dark deal under the most favorable terms or disfavorable terms for your characters. Just a couple of examples. Remember that a long-term goal is more often than not something that will make you stop adventuring once you've already reached it. So be sure that it's something that your character will actually need to face obstacles and hardships for in order to attain it. Now, am I saying that character concepts should be limited and vetoed if they don't conform to typical tropes associated with certain genre tones? Not really. Diversity is the spice of life after all, and someone can just as easily make an excellent character from a more outlandish concept relative to the tone. However, it requires the experience and finesse from both the player and the GM. For beginners of both of those roles, I always recommend to keep things simpler while they're gathering mileage, in the mechanical sense, like learning the rules and the elements of the game, and in the subjective narrative sense of actually running a game and what happens when scenarios from the DM are subject to the whims of the players, and how as a player, you always are kept on your toes with how unpredictable your GM scenarios and encounters would look like. To recap, everyone in the table must communicate and establish the setting of the campaign and reach a consensus. Then, make characters that is easy for everyone to accept. The concept of verisimilitude is important here. And finally, have a genre-fitting long-term goal to ensure that your character really fits in the story that everyone is telling at this table. The next pitfall I'd like to talk about is overdeveloping backstories. A lot of players come into the game with a pre-created character in mind, and sometimes before even learning the rules and finding people to play with. This is of course very valid, and I'm not gonna fault anyone for creating an OC. However, sometimes you gotta think twice if you really want to bring that specific character into a table. Now, I generally believe that essays about your character's backstory contributes very little into the actual quality of them being a likable or even a good character. How many times have you experienced this? You're all sitting in a table, sharing character introductions. Someone goes into this 10-minute tirade detailing their tragic life as their home village gets destroyed and how they had to make deals with demons and their journey across the hells, fighting hordes of demon armies, contracting both vampirism and lycanthropy in the process, as well as marrying and having 4 children which had to be hidden for their safety. He is being hunted by assassins almost daily, and now he's here alongside your characters, fighting goblins for pennies. And no one in the circle really gives a damn, not one iota of it. Long-winded and overly detailed character backstories generally suck for RPGs, and I'm here to discuss why. First, creating a character for a role-playing game is an entirely different process from writing a character for a narrative prose. The biggest factor that you have to consider about creating a character is that the majority of events and experiences that will be called back during the sessions are those that happen within and from the past sessions. Unlike, say, a novel, you're not the author of the story you're playing. You are playing with a story that is crafted by you and 4 to 5 other people within your table. It is unpredictable if your story has leverage in the current events of the game, or if it will even have any leverage in the future of the game. The danger of an overdeveloped backstory lies because it's easy to think of the effort that you went through writing out this detailed narrative about your character's experiences before they started adventuring. Surely, they must be shared on the table lest they become all for naught, right? From my personal experience, players that have overdeveloped backstories tend to get married to a few elements within their backstory, and they make that reflect into the way that they present their character in an almost caricature-like way. For example, a player who makes a character who in excruciatingly painful detail, gets roped into a deal with the devil because of a gamble, and is then either played as a caricature of a compulsive gambler, someone who will sacrifice logic and common sense to play a risk-loving person, or they could swing into the other direction and become this extremely cautious paranoid who will always make sure that their dealings do not come with the same infernal conditions as what they did, and they will be very happy to tell that to the other members of the party as well. The personalities of both of these characters become hijacked by one element of their backstory, and they're only there because of the sole intention to be able to bring that backstory again and again. In this case, the player feels that their effort of cooking up pages upon pages of narrative for their character necessitates just compensation in the form of being allowed to divulge it into the table as often as possible. After all, there is a markedly similar process in which a DM who writes content for the game is rewarded by having recognition and a small audience for them to share their content in that table. Why shouldn't players have that same luxury? The effect is that players become boxed in a certain character behavior that is intended only to display the extravagant hollow box that is their elaborate background, and it limits their potential for character development, lest the carefully written narrative becomes overwritten by new events and experiences that may render certain events and elements from their background moot. They become married to their backstories, and rather than it being a foundation for how they develop their character in the future, it becomes a crutch to simplify and, worst case scenario, bypass actual role-playing. My recommendation for new players is to keep their backstories as short and open as possible. The fewer sentences you need to introduce your character, the better. An encompassing introduction to a character means that you're free to fill in the gaps the more you collaborate with other players and the DM to flesh out your character. A shorter backstory also means that you have more leeway to discover more aspects about a character rather than just falling back to a few quirks that make a character's personality akin to that of a cardboard. Just like in real life, people aren't defined by a catchphrase or a thing that they're obsessing over, and their interactions are composed of layers of subtle hints about their personalities that have the capacity to be expressed, suppressed, and modified. The more that you play, the more you learn about the world in the campaign, and the more new information that you're bound to discover during the game, the easier it is for you to flesh out your backstory in a way that has a meaningful impact to your character. For the DMs, you have the obligation to ensure that the events in your game provide opportunities for the characters to grow as people. I'll be making future content that addresses what constitutes meaningful roleplay and how you can use it in your game, so watch out for that. To summarize everything, KISS. Keep it short and simple. Your backstory is guaranteed to be something you're going to want to flesh out deeper as you learn more about the game and the setting in which you're playing, and the worst thing that you can do right now is to make a very elaborate backstory that you're going to be ending up regretting once you're going to be learning more about how you play. The last pitfall I have in mind when creating a character is thinking that character creation ends at the sheet. So, you're done inputting all the stats and details in your character sheet, we're done, you've got a character, right? Wrong. Creating your character is a continuous process, and the bad news is most never see the end of the tunnel. A character is only done when the story ends, which is, for most of the times, the end of a campaign. Keep in mind that you change things in your character sheet almost constantly, not just about adding more features and growing stronger as you increase your levels, but also the hidden changes in the way that you play your character. The NPCs that you meet, events that you're involved with, and even the relationships that you forge with your party mates all have changes in your character. Now, keeping track of all these internal and non-mechanically relevant changes are probably beyond unrealistic. But here's where you should remember that, in the context of role-playing games, role-playing a character is an exercise in empathy more than it is in acting. Rather than being given stage directions and notes about how a character is supposed to feel and act in certain scenarios, role-playing necessitates that you put yourself inside a character's head. You remember things as they remember it, you feel things as they feel it. Separating your knowledge and emotions from a character's is a skill that you can practice and develop over time, preferably with the support of your GM and teammates. And this skill will pay dividends in terms of making sure that the quality of your role-playing is always strong, meaningful, and impactful when you're playing a character. And that's the most unique aspect of RPG characters compared to different fictional characters. Their story exists and grows contingent on the ideas of other people around them. And just as they constantly face the danger in their world full of goblins, bandits, and monsters, they also face the danger of the real world. Once a campaign dies, no matter what they're doing, how close or far they are to their answer and goals, their story just stops. I mean, that's tragic and beautiful and makes you really feel that every session matters. Maybe occasionally check in on the people in your table, see how they're doing, how they're feeling about the game right now, or bring your GM more snacks during the game, keep them well fed. Or that nothing matters and whatever, just make a whatever character, the campaign will die one day anyway. So that's my list for the top 3 character pitfalls one may encounter when building their first D&D guy. I'd like to know your thoughts and opinions about my opinions. If you know more pitfalls about starting out, or if you feel differently about my list, let me know all that in the comment section down below. I am planning to putting out more content in the next few weeks. If you like this video, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell button if you want to be notified when the next videos are coming. Thank you for watching. I'll see you around.